Now that Horizon 6 has been officially revealed to be taking place in Japan, discussions have been happening all over the internet about what the map will look like and what Japanese locations it could include. So I figure now might be a great time to talk about how Playground Games has built their previous maps, so that we can all have a better idea of what to expect for Japan in Forza Horizon 6. This video was sort of born out of a Reddit thread I saw shortly after the reveal, discussing the fact that the bridge you can see in the teaser is actually about 30 kilometers away from the far side of Mount Fuji, and this implies that the map could be absolutely gigantic. I also saw a discussion about the distance between Mount Fuji and Tokyo. In real life, these are well over an hour away from each other, and that again implies that the map could be huge if it takes hours to get from one landmark to another. However, as many players know and many commenters pointed out, Horizon does not do one-to-one recreations of real-world places. Things are scaled down and moved around, and for a fun exercise, I decided to plot out real-world locations in Mexico compared to where they are in Horizon 5's map. I posted this online and there was some good discussion about it, but I learned a few new things after making it, and also want to expand on this concept a bit more in a video. First things first, Horizon's Mexico is shaped nothing like the real country. To start, Baja California and the Gulf don't exist at all. There are landmarks from there that also exist in-game, but the two that I marked on this map, Mulegé and El Arco de Cabo San Lucas, are in very different locations compared to real life. Now we do, very broadly speaking, have a country that's bordered on both sides by a coastline and generally has mountains to the north and south, but even that isn't a consistent pattern across all games. Horizon 3 in Australia is of course not surrounded on all sides by water, and the same can be said for Horizon 4. There is only an eastern coastline here, where in reality Great Britain is an island surrounded on all sides by water. So when it comes to Japan, we again have an island, or rather many islands, that make up the country that people separate into a handful of distinct locations. Japan is a very unique looking country. It's laid out kind of unlike anything we've ever seen in Horizon, but I still don't think we should expect a map that looks like the country of Japan. I think it's very unlikely that we'll get a long diagonal chain of islands surrounded on all sides by water. I think it's much more likely we'll get a somewhat vertical rectangle-ish shape that's bordered on maybe two sides by a coastline. I think a natural northern border would be some snowy mountains in Hokkaido. I think that fits pretty well, but we've also never really had multiple large islands to work with in a Horizon map. In real life, Hokkaido is separate from the rest of Japan. You can't get there just by car, but again, if we look at Baja California in Mexico, that's all been kind of merged into one landmass in-game, so maybe they'll do the same for Hokkaido. Or maybe they won't include the island at all. For what it's worth, I do think it would make for a cool DLC location. Now we know we're getting both Mount Fuji and Tokyo City. Tokyo sits obviously around Tokyo Bay and very near the east coast of Japan's main island. Mount Fuji as well sits fairly close to the east coast, so again, if I'm working on best chances, I think we're likely to get an eastern coastline. To the west and south, I don't have a great guess. I do think it would make some sense to also have a western mountain border, but it's tricky. Almost all of Japan is populated and mountainous and within a few hours of the coast, so fictional in-game borders can kinda be drawn anywhere. That said, many of Japan's bigger cities and landmarks exist closer to the east coast, so a western mountain border makes the most sense to me. Finally, to the south, much of the south of Japan is very defined by its warmer coastal climate and towns, so just based on broad stroke speculation, I could also see the south end of a Horizon Japan map being largely coastal. And this ends up giving us a map that looks sorta like this. If I'm making my best educated guess based on very little concrete information and basing things on trends across the previous 5 games, this is kinda what I think Japan will look like in Horizon 6. And I can't wait to see if this ends up aging like wine or milk. I think the latter is more likely. Now with that, let's talk about landmarks. Horizon maps have a split of real landmarks combined with locations that just kind of seem like real places. For example, in Horizon 5's Mexico, the volcano isn't a real named volcano, the dunes aren't real dunes, and this resort isn't a real resort. Of course though, there are plenty of real landmarks too. Going back to my map, all of these are real places in Mexico, just in very different locations. And even some areas like this lake and dam, while not specifically named in-game, are very clearly designed after Malpaso. One interesting thing I learned about this map is that Playa Azul in-game is actually a blend of two locations in real life. There is a real-world place in Mexico called Playa Azul that's on the coast, has a very similar layout to the location in-game, and quite similar buildings. However, as someone on Twitter pointed out to me, the central location in Horizon's Playa Azul is actually a direct recreation of a completely different location on the other side of the country, and Playa Azul's location in-game more closely aligns with where Holbox would be in real life. This town has a landmark in it from a completely different town literally 1,000 miles away, and I doubt almost anyone ever noticed that. So Horizon often mixes and blends real locations with places inspired by real locations and places that just kind of have the vibe and general feel of the real country. And we can probably expect the same from Japan. Every map up to this point has had about a dozen or so major real-world landmarks, and with Japan being the biggest map yet, I'd expect maybe 15 to 20 real-world locations. I'm sure we'll get a smattering of famous temples, castles, and shrines. I'd expect we're gonna get this famous island shrine, or at least something that looks similar. Maybe a couple of the more famous parks or gardens around Tokyo, the Imperial Palace, probably some landmarks like Tokyo Tower, maybe the Sky Tree as well, and Shibuya Crossing, or something that at least feels similar, as well as some other places that feel like real areas. I'm sure we'll get an underground parking garage to mimic UDX in Akiba. They've hinted at the fact too that there will be elevated roads around Tokyo, which can really only mean the highway network, aka Shotoko Expressway, aka Wangan and C1 Loop. We're definitely gonna get a spiritual recreation of those highway routes. They've also been very clear to say that Tokyo City will be in the game. They've never said just Tokyo, and I think they're trying to distinguish between this and the greater Tokyo metro area, which is kinda all of this, and to be clear, is much larger in real life than the entire Horizon 5 map. I'm sure Tokyo in-game will be big, but I'm expecting maybe 2 to 3 times the size of Surfer's Paradise or Edinburgh, not a massive entire map-sized city. This is by far the largest metropolitan area they've ever tried to recreate, so we might get some unexpected surprise here, but I've gotta think we should temper expectations on the size of Tokyo in-game. Outside of the city, I'd bet there will be a bamboo forest somewhere, some farm fields in the plains. Of course, we're gonna get mountains, probably bordering the map like I brought up earlier. Horizon 5 marketed that they had 11 biomes in their Mexico map. Here's a list of all of them, and here's more or less what I would guess for Japan, based on that Horizon 5 marketing and what very little we know of the FH6 map. Every Horizon game has also had one main city: Carson, Nice, Surfer's Paradise, Edinburgh, and Guanajuato, which have all been supported by one or two smaller named towns: Castelletto, Byron Bay, Ambleside, Mulegé, and so on. Again, we know that Tokyo City will be in Horizon 6, and I think it's safe to say that will be the main city. That said, I think we also know what a supporting town will be too, because, well, it was in the teaser. Fujikawaguchiko is the town we can see right here. It's a perfect fit for a lakeside town next to Mount Fuji. It'll definitely be in the game. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if we got a few other smaller named towns, probably a mountain town and maybe a named coastal town too, but these are likely impossible to speculate. I mean, if you knew Mexico would be the next Horizon map, could you have guessed Mulegé and Playa Azul to be the supporting towns, or Ambleside in Great Britain for Horizon 4, Japan just has way too many very pretty smaller towns that could fit anywhere into the game's map. It's anyone's guess, and I don't think we'll see any other major cities. I also want to speak to the roads, because Horizon's roads have never really been that related to their real-world counterparts, outside of a few specific landmarks. So for example, I'm definitely not expecting like a one-to-one version of the C1 Loop or Bayshore Line. I'm expecting something that kinda reminds me of those. I'm also not expecting exact replicas of famous mountain roads at Hakone or Haruna. I'm expecting some made-up mountain roads about as narrow as we got in Rally Adventure, and maybe one or two super tight single lanes to appease that crowd. But practically speaking, Horizon's roads need to accommodate a full grid of people racing on them, which is at least 12 cars, hopefully more in this next game. Real famous mountain roads in Japan just don't accommodate that style of racing, but we do have Fujimi Kaido in Motorsport, which can support 24 drivers on grid, and it's not that narrow, but it looks and feels great to drive on. So I'm not expecting a lot of really tight roads in Horizon 6, but I do expect a handful of roads similar in style to Fujimi and Rally Adventure. Maybe 3 or so longer paved runs and a couple of unpaved routes too. Hopefully even a snowy one up north. Racetracks are another interesting topic. Of course, Japan has dozens of well-known real racetracks, but PGG would have to license those, and they've never done that in the past for Horizon games. Previous games have had specific racing facilities, drag strips, rally courses, and in Horizon 5, a fictional racetrack, and again, I expect Horizon 6 to have at least one racetrack in it. Some people have thrown out the idea that it'll be a crossover with Motorsport and will get Hakone Circuit, which I do think would be kind of cool. And then people have gone on to say, okay, if we got Hakone, maybe Fujimi Kaido will be in Horizon 2, which again, wouldn't be upset about, but I don't expect that. I think it's much more likely that we'll get a different fictional track somewhere outside the city, maybe attached to a festival site again. So all said and done, as much as it's fun to speculate about a massive scale map that looks like the real country with half a dozen huge cities, real racetracks, real mountain roads, and every famous landmark you can think of, that's not what Horizon has ever done in the past. And even though this is the first time since Horizon 2 that we've been fully on a new generation of consoles and not had to worry about things like OG Xbox One hard drives, I still want people to have reasonable expectations. The map is going to be bigger. It is going to have a modern city. It's going to have a decent handful of famous landmarks. There are going to be some nice mountain roads and an elevated highway network, and we'll just have to wait and see what the rest brings us. Who knows, maybe I'll be wrong about all of this whole video will age terribly, and they'll blow our expectations out of the water, but if that happens, I'll just be pleasantly surprised. In the meantime, I'm keeping my expectations based around what we've seen from every game in the past. Thank you for watching, folks. If I maybe missed some angle or idea that you think is relevant, definitely let me know. I'd love to know what you think of how plausible my theoretical Japan map is, and what ideas you all have, or what is most important for you to see in the next game. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.